Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're delighted to welcome you to our Zoom meeting. It's arranged by Liberal Voice for Women. We are a special interest group of Liberal Democrat members and supporters aiming to promote the interests of women and girls within our party. We're focusing in these meetings upon topics which we feel the Liberal Democrats need to understand and discuss openly. We're not convinced that the party's current policies are all in the interests of girls and women. Excuse me. Tonight, I'd like to welcome two speakers, Tracy Shaw and Tanya Carter, who represent the group Safe Schools Alliance. This body exists to work with schools and educators to ensure that school policies meet the safeguarding needs of all students, and that they do this whilst taking into account the protected characteristics of the Equality Act 2010. They aim to provide clarity on the law and other evidence-based guidance and support where conflict between protected characteristics arises. It's the organisation which made Oxfordshire County Council withdraw their unhelpful guidance on RSE and successfully challenge the CPS. Can I ask you all, please, to put your questions in the chat as we go along, and I'll call on you to ask them at the end. Please bear in mind that we are recording this event and we'll be sharing the recording on YouTube afterwards. So please indicate when you write your questions whether you'd like us to ask it for you or you prefer to ask it yourself. I suggest that you put your Zoom screen on speaker view for the best view of the discussion and get ready to be entertained and enlightened. Now, let me introduce you to our speakers. Tanya, Tracy, are you teachers? Are you parents or concerned parents interested in safeguarding or professionals?
Hi, Alison, and thanks for asking us here today. I'll answer that first and then I'll hand over to Tanya. I'm not a teacher, I'm not a professional, I'm a parent. So my involvement in this is I have got two daughters in secondary school age now. My involvement in this is because I've been increasingly concerned about their rights in school and the safeguarding of them. So yeah, I'm coming at this definitely from the parents' point of view. Tanya, I'll hand over to Tanya just to say a few words about herself because she does have a background as a governor and in safeguarding and in teaching. So Tanya, I'll hand over.
Hi Alison, thanks for having us both here. Yes, like Tracy said, I'm a parent like Tracy. I've got daughters myself. All through my adult life, I've been involved in working with children, both volunteering. I always ran toddler groups when my children were little. I've been a Rainbows leader. I worked in early years. I was an early years practitioner working with 2 to 5 year olds, and I was chair of governors at my daughter's junior school when I got the school back up to good in 18 months. So I have a 20 years background working with children in various roles, and all through that time I've done a lot of safeguarding training, from the child protection and the hands-on stuff of working on the ground with small children and taking disclosures from them, right up to doing safer recruitment, because I've been involved in recruiting teachers, including head teachers for the school, which is something you need to be very careful with the safeguarding on and make sure you employ the right person, because it is so much easier to prevent someone entering your organisation than it is to remove someone from your organisation once they're there and it's then found that there's a problem with them. So I think there's a lot political parties and various other organisations could learn from safer recruitment in schools to protect themselves from entryism. So like Tracy said, I'm a mum like her, and I have a background in childcare and safeguarding in my governor role.
Yeah, great. How did you first these issues that you're campaigning on?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that, Alison. What did you say?
How did you first hear about the issues that you campaign on?
So from my point of view, I think I was first alerted to the South ID by Fair Play for Women. I started getting quite interested and concerned. My daughter's a gymnast, and I think her coach sent me the new policy, I think about maybe 2018, 2019, I can't remember now, the new policy that was trans inclusive, which essentially meant that she could be getting changed with boys at competitions and competing against boys as well. I mean, gymnastics was an interesting one because it, is a sport that predominantly attracts girls in the early years. And so, you know, this policy was going to have a detrimental effect on them. So I started learning a little bit more. I got in contact with Nick Williams from Fair Play for Women, then started digging into, you know, the schools policy and so on and so forth. And was introduced to Stephanie from Transgender Trend and a number of other people. So I met Tanya and the other people from Safe Schools Alliance kind of informally in Facebook groups. And we kind of started to realise that we were all experiencing very similar problems within either our schools or our LEAs. I'm from Oxfordshire, so we particularly were concerned with what was going on in Oxfordshire. We talked to our school. There's two of us from Oxfordshire in Safe Schools Alliance, talked to our daughter's school about why they had this policy, and their answer was just, well, it's come from county, and although we're an academy, we defer to county for these things because we don't know what we're doing and they do. And so when we actually pointed out that they were legally liable for the policy that they put in place, they did actually amend it and took the policy away off their website. So quite early on, actually, but we realised there was a much bigger problem, and that was with Oxfordshire County Council. So to cut a very long story short, we started trying to go through the consultation process with Oxfordshire County Council and the Oxfordshire Safeguarding Board. They were very obstructive. They weren't willing to talk to us. We had safeguarding questions that we kept answering. Nobody was prepared to answer them. The answer that just kept coming back was about inclusivity, no focus on the safeguarding issues that we'd raised at all. And the Oxfordshire Toolkit said things like, on residential trips, anyone who identified as a girl should be sharing with girls. Anybody who you should be splitting changing rooms and toilets and sports on self-identified gender for children rather than by sex. That anybody who complained, any child who complained about this should be talked to about their views. So essentially making it their problem, and actually that child, if they were uncomfortable with sharing mixed sex changing rooms, then perhaps that child should be accommodated for separately. So we went through a number of rounds. We did meet with senior people at Oxfordshire County Council, and it so transpired during the course of this that we were talking and networking with others, that 3 people came forward: a teacher, a parent, and a child, a teenager, came forward to say that they were concerned about this policy. And so Safe Schools Alliance said that we would support these people if they wanted to make a legal challenge. They wanted to stay anonymous, and so then the Safe Schools Alliance role in that really was to take it forward, to talk to press, to get people interested, to do some crowdfunding. What happened in the end is that the teacher and the parent dropped out, and it was a teenage girl bringing the action against Oxfordshire County Council. So by this time, I think I'd been involved for about a year. Very early on in that process, we decided to form Safe Schools Alliance. A group of us decided that we needed a body, we needed an organisation, because we're all experiencing the same things. We were all reinventing the wheel. We thought actually what parents and teachers could really do with is, a set of comprehensive guidelines, a way of structuring of how to challenge schools and LEAs. So those sort of things happened hand in hand, really. And the Oxfordshire County Council Toolkit was withdrawn. The judicial review was granted. However, Oxfordshire decided to withdraw from the legal process. And so which was in some ways unfortunate, because I think it would have been very helpful to have had that legal challenge. I'm sure, we're quite confident that we would have won, and therefore every other trans toolkit in the country would have had to have been removed. As it is, there's lots of people that are out there challenging their council's similar toolkits at the moment by pointing out that the Oxfordshire one was removed. It was quite a long answer to that question, really, in terms of how we got involved. So really come together as a group of professionals and parents who were concerned and decided that we needed a group, we needed a voice. And our purpose is twofold. Our purpose is to provide resources for teachers and parents to use, which are all on our website, and we have many resources on our website. to help them and support them in talking to their schools and challenging their schools, but also to provide a voice at lobbying level, so MP level, and representing the concerns and worries to the Department for Education, to MPs, and we've been talking to MPs, the Lords, and so on and so forth for quite a while. So that was kind of how we came about, and a bit of the purpose for what we're doing and sort of our approach. And actually, I found our first mission statement the other day that we wrote when we first formed, because we're like, right, we've got to, and we haven't strayed at all from our mission and how we were going to approach it and what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. We've had other objectives come along. We've had time pressures. We've sometimes not got round to the things we wanted to do because we're supporting so many parents and so many teachers. But essentially, we've stayed really true to what the aims of the organisation were. So that was 2.5 years ago. So Tanya, do you want to say a bit about sort of how you got involved with this?
Yes. Well, like I said, I've got daughters, and I think I've had daughters at secondary school probably since 2009. I've had daughters at secondary school, and once they entered the secondary school system, I started seeing all the problems with the sexism that girls suffer in schools and the sexual harassment, all the stuff that came out in the NEU and UK Feministas report in 2017 that's called It's Just Everywhere, and more recently with Everyone's Invited, about the awful stuff that's going on in schools and at parties. This was stuff I was observing firsthand from about 2009. What children were being exposed to online was absolutely appalling. What was the amount of grooming that was going on online was really awful. Adults seemed to not realise what was going on online and seemed just completely ill-equipped to safeguard children against it. So I started challenging my own secondary school based on what my daughters were being exposed to, what I was seeing going on in line, what I was seeing going on in my own community. I started challenging that both as a parent and in my role as governors, because safeguarding children is something I feel really quite passionately about. By the time we sort of got to 2015, one of the concerns I was noticing online was girls who would have probably in my day been lesbian. They were sort of being told online that if you were same-sex attracted, that might be an indication that really you were a trans man. And then they were starting to watch videos like Alex Bertie and all these things on YouTube that sort of glamorized and made transitioning seem really quite simple, and were giving out binders to underage girls. And I was seeing some really distressed children, and teachers just not seeming to know what to do with this. Around the same time, I started reading on Mumsnet, so I was aware of the wider issues that women were raising about self-ID, and then groups like Women's Place and Fair Play for Women were formed. And to be honest, I just didn't think that it would make it to the schools, because I thought, well, everyone's had their safeguarding training, the safeguards will kick in, people will recognise this as undermining safeguarding of children, and it will be stopped. Head teachers will recognise that this is against safeguarding, and they will not allow it in their schools. Sort of moving forward, 2016, 2017, I realised that something had gone very, very wrong, and that safeguarding seemed to have failed, and that things that were not benefiting children were being pushed into schools, and that rather than schools challenging what children were reading online about how you could literally change sex, and that if you were a girl and had a sex change, you could then father a baby with your girlfriend, schools seemed to be reinforcing what children were reading online rather than challenging it. So at that point, I became really quite concerned, and I started reaching out to other people. Not only was I challenging my own school, I was going further. I was writing to the Department for Education, I was writing to Ofsted, I was writing to my MP, I was writing to Lords, I was writing to various organisations, politicians, councillors, anybody who I thought might listen to me and help. And through through just sort of natural networking and talking to other women, I started being put in contact with other women who were having similar problems in their children's schools and colleges. People knew that I challenged it in my own schools and had some success, so I started to be put into contact with other women. And by this sort of word of mouth and meeting up, I eventually met all the other women that we formed Safe Schools Alliance with. And at that point, I realised that, yes, this was a national problem. Safeguarding appeared to have failed nationally, and that there really was an urgent need for somebody to do something about it. And safeguarding is everyone's responsibility. Everybody needs to stand up and protect children and speak out when something's wrong. So here I am.
And what I don't understand, and you may have got the handle on this, I don't understand why so many bodies, including schools and colleges or public bodies, appear so willing so quickly to disregard the statutory safeguarding guidance.
I think people either haven't attended enough safeguarding training, or they don't understand it. I mean, the fact that people are falling for silencing techniques like being called homophobic or racist or transphobic or bigoted or pearl clutcher, or these are all things you learn about on advanced safeguarding that are used as silencing techniques, and that you're trained not to respond to this stuff. You're trained to centre the child and make sure that what you're doing is in the child's best interest. So people have clearly not been using safer recruitment for all agencies to do with children. I mean, we believe that safer recruitment shouldn't just be used on people who work directly with children. It should be used on anybody who has anything to do with children, anybody who's writing policies that affect children, anybody who's writing materials for children. There needs to be real scrutiny of who's getting involved. Do they understand safeguarding? What are their motivations for being involved? Is what they're doing for the benefit of children, or are they pushing a political ideology? Because that's against the 1996 Education Act. And that there really is a concern that we seem to have. I mean, some schools are doing a great job, don't get me wrong, and some schools are working well with parents and haven't let this stuff in their schools. But there's a really alarming number of schools that seem to be headed up by people who don't understand their safeguarding responsibilities, or that the Education Act means that they cannot allow political indoctrination in their schools. And it's really concerning, and it's getting worse by the day, just judging on our inbox.
And I think, just to add on to what Tanya was saying, I think another layer of this, which leads on from not enough safeguarding training to question this, is that schools and teachers have been sold a narrative in the same way general society has been sold a narrative. So, you know, the amount of times we hear parents trying to talk to schools and they say, oh, but what about the suicide statistics of trans youth? What about the self-harm? What about the mental, what about the fact that actually, well, it's homophobic, and actually the rhetoric, that what they're saying is straight from the same people that have been putting this out to the rest of society. And I think there's such a fear that if you do the wrong thing, and the wrong thing is not believe in gender and not affirm a child who says to you, I'm actually a boy, not a girl, and rather than actually following your safeguarding training and taking a child-centered approach and not recognizing you're not a health professional and you should not be making any decisions about whatever treatment that child should have, because you've actually you've been trained, you've read all the horror stories, and you don't want to do the wrong thing. I think on the one hand, which carries on from the safer recruitment and safeguarding, because everybody knows that one of the prime ways to undermine safeguarding is to undermine people who've got concerns by calling them bigoted, or that they're going to do even more harm, or to cancel them in some ways. I think the other thing is that a lot of pressure is coming from children themselves, from teenagers in schools. So of course, the teachers are saying, well, we're listening to what our you know, our students are saying, we're listening to what our teenagers are saying, well, you know, that's all very well and good, but actually if those children are just telling you things that undermine basic principles of safeguarding and the law, then there needs to be pushback. So I think it's all part and parcel of the same issue, is that safeguarding has been undermined, and it appears that it's been deliberately undermined in some ways, because what's being presented to schools as the way forward, well, it undermines safeguarding to start with, but it also guilts people and makes people think, well, I best do the right thing and I don't want to do the wrong thing. And oh dear, you know, we don't want suicides on our hands because that will be our fault if we haven't followed the rhetoric. So I think it's all part and parcel of what Tanya was saying, the ability to recognise that and call that out. I mean, we know it's hard, don't we? We all find it hard. You know, it is, you know, everyone gets worried about saying something or people taking it the wrong way or not understanding what it is you're trying to say. That in a school environment where you've got a lot of this is being driven by children and sometimes their parents as well, the schools have not only got what they're being told by the lobby organisations, because they're in schools, they're all in schools talking to teachers, they've also got some parents and some students as well. So it's very difficult also to find an alternative, credible alternative path. Everywhere schools look, it says it's got the same answer. You know, they talk about the suicide statistics, they talk about gender identity as being a fact. And so there's nothing alternative. And the Department for Education, quite frankly, are not doing its job, because they're allowing resources into school, they're making no checks. They've said it's not their responsibility, it's the school's responsibility. Their guidelines, they produce better guidelines in September, but they're still woolly and they're not being enforced. So what's happening is there's, you know, people going to their schools. There's some schools that are finding it difficult and actually would welcome more robust guidance from the Department for Education. But of course, the Department for Education are Stonewall champions, or they were. Therefore, it's all tied up as part and parcel of the same thing. And it's, you know, it's trying to unpick that. So yeah, I mean, that question, Alison, is, you know, got a very long and complicated answer. The short answer is that safeguarding has been undermined, and deliberately so. What we need people to do about it is actually we need the Department for Education and Ofsted and the Children's Commissioner to do their jobs, which we don't believe they are.
I'd like to know, what is Ofsted doing when they inspect them? Are they inspecting for compliance with safeguarding? And can you institute some sort of star system so that some parents who have found their schools are doing the right job properly can get some kudos?
Well, Ofsted do inspect on safeguarding, but the problem is once the schools become outstanding, Ofsted generally won't inspect them again unless serious concerns are raised. So there are plenty of schools who were possibly outstanding over a decade ago and Ofsted hasn't gone into them. And if you raise safeguarding concerns with Ofsted, which we have done about a number of schools, and they have agreed with us that what we're saying is a safeguarding concern, but what Ofsted do is they will then instruct the county to go and carry out a safeguarding inspection of the school. And a problem we're finding is that a lot of the councils have also been captured because they are Stonewall diversity champions. So the understanding of safeguarding has been undermined in the people that Ofsted are now instructing to go and inspect the standard of safeguarding at the schools. So we are at a stage where we need politicians and the laws to intervene, because that is the only way to undo this level of regulatory capture. So we need everybody to be challenging their school, challenging their local council, and writing to their MP and insisting that they do something about this.
And I think you've got some draft letters to MPs and people like that on your website. Is that right?
Do we have? Oh, yes. We do. We have. I mean, let me just have a quick look. If you go to our resources, we have a fact sheet section, a letter template section. Just, I won't read them all out to you, but just to give you some idea.
They're fantastic resources.
We have 15 fact sheets covering advice note on socially transitioning. So schools who are socially transitioning in children, what teachers and parents can do about that. Our most popular, that's a very popular one. The other popular one is how to complain to your child's school, written by Tanya, a step-by-step guide of actually how to go about it, because there is a process that you need to go through. But also we unpick some PSHE RSE resources from some popular providers. We've got one on RSE and the law. We've got one about the concerns with trans toolkit. And then we've also got letter templates. Let me see how many of those we've got now. Yeah, 14 letter templates, one on mermaids if your school has mermaids training, one on Stonewall if your school wants to be a Stonewall champions, one on the genderbread person if anybody appears in anyone's school packs. We've got one, and one on mixed sex toilets, etc, etc. So yes, we do. What we really want to do next, I think what's on our list is that what we'd like to do is every time a parent has an issue and they write to us, we'd also like them to write to their MP. So we want to make that process kind of easier and obvious. So that's the next thing that we're working on, just to make that a really simple procedure, because we just think people's MPs need to start hearing the concerns from the parents. You know, we present them all the time, but until they start hearing from their constituents, you know, that's what will really make a difference.
Yes, I see. I'm staggered reading some of the materials on your website. I have seen them elsewhere, of course, but not in such a concentrated form as I hear. At the scale of the sexism and the homophobia involved in designating these concepts, why don't heads and responsible governors see this and challenge it? I simply don't understand why the head teachers and the specialist teachers don't have the courage to do their job.
It's difficult to understand, Alison, and I share your feelings on this. You know, and sometimes when we've experienced it ourselves when, you know, all of us have had to talk to our own schools about these issues, you know, as parents, as opposed to being representatives of Safe Schools Alliance. And it feels that, you know, the push of DEI or EDI, or basically diversity, inclusion, equality, whichever way you want to put that acronym together, the push seems to be everything at the moment, and that overrides everything. And of course, you've got these organizations who say, we'll come in and we'll look after your, you know, your responsibilities in that area. We'll have an award, you know, we'll give you an award and you have to do these certain things. And then sort of teachers go, okay, well, that's that box ticked. We don't have to worry about it, without thinking any deeper. The ones I can totally understand the lack of thought that has gone into some of this, because, you know, schools are busy places, teachers are busy people. It does become surprising, disappointing when you have these conversations with teachers and head teachers, and you just get the rhetoric back at you. You know, it feels like it's been, you know, it is institutional capture on quite a you know, quite well significant level. But no, I share your how can you not see it? I share that.
What responses do you and the other parents who send the letters that you suggest, what responses do they have from schools, and do you see any trends or any changes in trends?
Tanya, do you want to?
Well, yeah.
You probably talked to more people recently than me. Do you want to?
Well, our latest document, we've tried to cover a lot of the generally given responses from schools, and it's up on our website. People can access that, and it talks about the things schools say, like, oh, well, it's approved by the DFE or it's approved by the PSHE Association, and then people need to be pointing out to their schools that actually, if a child comes to harm through following these policies, it is you who will be liable, and not the Department for Education or the PSHE Association or whoever you think has approved the document, because it is you who is responsible for safeguarding in your schools. I mean, for example, this morning we had an email in, a very upset mother, her 14-year-old daughter is being made to change in the same changing room as a boy because he said that he identifies as a girl. And the girl and her friends are very upset about the fact that they're having to take their clothes off in front of this boy. Or not only that, but the boy is taking his clothes off in front of them. They're very upset. The mother's challenged the school, and the head teacher has just said that, well, this is the guidance we've got from the council, 14-year-olds to be getting changed in a mixed sex space. I mean, that's just absolutely unbelievable. That is a clear safeguarding risk there. And in the age of everyone's invited, when we're talking about what girls are being subjected to in schools, I think it was Dr. Jess Taylor of Victim Focus did some research recently, and 97% of women who responded to that survey said they had experienced sexual harassment. So these are the sort of figures that we're talking about in schools. And in that environment, we've got head teachers thinking that it's appropriate to put a boy in the girls' changing rooms. And when they're challenged on that, just saying that the council told me so. It's absolutely unbelievable. All we can say to people is get in contact with us. Go through the complaint system at your school, challenge the council. We will support you to do this. And eventually, like the Oxfordshire women did, legal action is unfortunately the way we're going to have to go to preserve the rights of girls, because we know the situation in schools for girls is really dire at the moment with the sort of porn that boys are exposed to, which is really quite damaging to them. It's abusive to boys, the porn that they're being exposed to online, but then they go into school, these very damaged boys, and the girls are exposed to that behaviour. And in this culture, we seem to be unpicking the girls' rights further. It's not good for girls, it's discrimination, it's sex discrimination, and we do have laws, and parents have to insist that schools uphold those laws.
And we do find, you know, we have had people who have come back to us. I mean, I think the mixed sex toilets letter number 5 in our list on our website, that was actually written by a supporter that we asked if we could just use it for our website because it was so good. And actually, you know, it bore fruit. There were results. They dialed back on it. The issue with toilets in schools is that schools often say, oh, but this is the advice we got from the provider, that these are perfectly legal, when we know that they're not legal. You know, the Schools Premises Act says that there needs to be single sex toilets, and actually the only way they can be shared is with a, you know, door to ceiling, a floor to ceiling door and a basin, etc. And that's just not happening. I mean, some schools are literally just taking off doors and sticking on a gender neutral sign on the toilet door. We had one parent who said that her daughter, I think this was I can't remember whether it was a primary or I think it was secondary school, her daughter had to walk past the urinals to get to the cubicles because they'd just taken off the door. So she had to walk past boys going to the toilet before she could get to the cubicles. Again, you know, no, nothing. Just literally where they just turned what were the boys' toilets with urinals and cubicles into gender neutral toilets with nothing else at all. So it does require parents to take action and actually put aside that natural discomfort we feel about challenging our schools, because, you know, quite often you're happy with lots of other things the school does, and you like the teachers and you like the teaching, and you have to put aside the fact that actually the official complaints, the formal complaints process is there for a reason. And it doesn't mean to say, you know, you're anti the school in other way. It doesn't mean to say that, you know, the English teacher you really like and has been very supportive, or the Senko, you're not complaining about those people. You're complaining about the decision making at the school and the leadership that has allowed those decisions to happen. So you have to really put aside those feelings of discomfort that you might not want to do that because you don't want to make things awkward for your child. I can say that, you know, all of us at Safe Schools Alliance are not afraid to challenge schools, and our children are no worse off for it. In fact, probably the opposite. So, you know, parents have to be prepared to do this and follow the process. and challenge if the school says, well, the LEA told me that. Well, it's not the LEA's decision. At the end of the day, your head will be on the block if this all goes wrong. And actually, that often is the thing that will stop and make governors and governing bodies and head teachers maybe stop and think, about what they're doing, because ultimately the responsibility lies with them, because the LEAs will be very quick to say, this is just guidance. Nobody has to follow it. This is just our guidance. So there's a lot of, passing of bucks, and a lot of people, just protecting themselves in the whole sort of system, really. And so, yeah, it requires parents to take action where they see, actually sex discrimination, and mixed sex toilets and mixed sex changing rooms and mixed sports are a prime example of that. Whatever your feelings are on, children who may or may wish to transition or is experiencing gender dysphoria, girls are entitled to single sex provision within schools, and that is the law.
There's a question, our first question actually comes from Martin, who says, if I'm not happy with the RSE or the PSHE topics that the school are producing, do I tell my children that the school are telling them nonsense, or will that undermine everything else the school are teaching them?
No, I think you can have that dual conversation by saying, actually, this topic, it isn't right. That doesn't mean that, what they're teaching you in maths and what they're teaching you in history. I mean, I would say science, but I mean, I would want to know what they're teaching them in science if they can teach them in PSHE that, humans can change sex. So, I mean, I'd probably want to see what the science teachers had to say about that in those organisations. No, I think you can. I mean, I think, especially it's harder, isn't it, in primary school? Primary school children, it's a more difficult conversation. Certainly in secondary school, absolutely. I mean, yeah, you need to have the conversation that actually they're not always right about these things, and a lot of these things are just opinion that has been shared with them.
And I hear a lot from parents about their children who are on the autism spectrum, and I now about concerns for children who are siblings of those who are severely ill or have a disability, or with parents in that case, being vulnerable to gender distress. Can you tell me more about these issues and the way they're handled in schools?
So, I mean, there's a lot of evidence that supports that children who are autistic, ASD, are more susceptible, I think. I think there's various, I mean, I'm no expert. I think there's various reasons for that. I think quite often children who are autistic are find it difficult to fit in anyway, and so sort of look for other ways to fit in. I suppose there can be an issue that there can be sort of some very structured thinking about what makes a boy and what makes a girl. I think, I mean, I'm no expert on this topic, so I can't really speak with sort of authority about why this is, but I think what schools are failing to do, because again, they've been told that affirmation is the only way. As soon as a child says to them, I mean, in the language of the groups like Stonewall, they would say a child comes out to you, or says that they're actually trans. I think what schools are doing, rather than following the safeguarding and following sort of principles of sort of taking a step back and thinking, what might else be going on with this child? Is there something at home? I mean, there's links between girls having sexual harassment and actually then experiencing gender dysphoria, especially teenage girls deciding that they realize the attraction and the attention their female bodies get from males. They don't like it. I'm not minimizing gender dysphoria at all. There's many reasons for it, but what schools tend to do, because they've been told that unless you affirm and unless you believe this child and celebrate their identity, they're at risk of self-harm and suicide and so on, they're not giving these children the space and what was called watchful waiting, which would be to say, well, okay, express yourself however you feel, let's not make any big decisions. I think the problem often is that once a child is affirmed and celebrated at school for being their authentic selves, it's very hard for them to come back, and if we had somebody who was disagreeing with me here, they would be on saying, but they're their authentic selves. Why do you think they're going to come back, and why is this something bad for them? And I think it's about giving that child space, and I think that's what's not happening. And of course, there's the social aspect as well. You find that there will be groups of children that all you know, suddenly identify or have gender dysphoria or identify a certain way. So, you know, there's the peer aspect of that as well. Tanya, have you got anything to add on that?
Look, yes, we see quite a lot of evidence of children who are on the spectrum and have then perhaps been looking online. If they're on the spectrum, they perhaps find it more difficult to fit in with their peers or relate to their peer group. They're then looking at stuff online that is saying, oh, well, maybe you're trans if you're feeling like this. We've seen some really upsetting stuff from support groups for parents of children with SEN, where people are dealing with really quite complex issues with children with special needs, that there's other trauma in the family, and other parents in the group are saying, oh, maybe have you thought that your child might have gender issues? Maybe this could be what's up with them. It's people are in a very vulnerable state. They need help and support, and they're being offered a solution which perhaps isn't the best solution for them. And schools really need to be taking a much more holistic approach and looking at the whole child. What else is going on in that child's life? Have they been subjected to trauma? They've been subjected to abuse. What is going on in the household? What are they looking at online? Is your school doing enough to challenge gender stereotypes? Why would a girl think that just because she wants to wear trousers and play football and she's cut her hair short and she doesn't like makeup, whereas the rest of the girls do, why should that make her think that she's not really a girl? What is the school doing to challenge the gender stereotypes? And what is the school doing to challenge the homophobia? I mean, when we're looking at things like girls thinking because they fancy a girl and all their mates fancy boys, and they then take that to mean that, well, perhaps I'm really a boy if I fancy a girl, then that's just an example of homophobia not being adequately challenged in schools and in society as a whole. I mean, if we look at what the whistleblowers are saying from the Tavistock, they've said things like some of the children they saw, they felt they had internalized homophobia, or they'd been subjected to homophobic bullying, or in some cases they thought the parents were quite homophobic and that parents would rather have a daughter than a gay son. So it's really quite there's some quite complex stories that people really need to be compassionate about, and children and their parents need quite specialised support, whereas what they're getting is a one-size-fits-all, just affirm the child who says they're the opposite sex, and not really looking at, is that in that individual child's best interests? Quite often it's not. And then when we're looking further afield, like with putting the boy in the girls' changing rooms, there's all the other children in the school to consider as well. And schools are responsible for safeguarding every single child in their care. And that is a very difficult job. Schools need to take on board all members of their community. That's all the children in their school. That's all the parents. And a lot of those parents will have quite differing belief systems or views on things. And it is tricky for schools, but they do need to balance competing rights, and they do need to make sure that all children and all families' rights and beliefs are respected, and that all the children are safeguarded. And you cannot safeguard one child at the detriment to several others.
Yes. Anne's got a theory, a comment that she wants to make from her own experience. Anne?
Well, I might just say first, actually, just in response to that conversation. So I am autistic, and Dr. Tony Atwood is an expert in autism in girls, and it's not an official diagnostic criteria, but one of the things he talks about is a preference for autistic girls for playing with boys, and kind of various theories around that that boys are more logical. I know from my own personal experience, I find women a bit emotional and unpredictable. So there's a bit of a sweeping generalization, but I think, it's easier for me to get along with men and boys, because it's a different way of communicating. So I think that for autistic people can be confusing, because if you have a preference for playing with the opposite sex, then perhaps it's not so much of a leap to then think, well, actually, maybe I am the opposite sex because you know, I'm a bit different to the other girls. But no, my point is kind of my point that I always make in pretty much all of these presentations is just that I think my theory is that people have forgotten what it's like to be to experiencing confusion around identity. And I think maybe not everybody goes through it, but I mean, I know I certainly did. And in my case, gender was a big part of that, possibly because I was autistic and undiagnosed autistic. But I think kind of most of us go through a process of trying to discover who we are and being confused about that. And that I think it's been very easy for those with a particular agenda to promote to play on the fear and confusion that people have around trans issues and the ignorance that they have around that, and to think that that particular subset of the human race are completely different to the rest of us. And my argument is that no, they're not, and that some of us go through that period of gender confusion and then grow up to become lesbian, gay, bisexual. And some people go through that process and then grow up to become trans, and that's completely fine. But I think it's when the danger is when everybody gets lumped in together and there's no room for nuance, that's when that's my fear for those children who would have grown up to, you know, be happily LGB, might be autistic, and actually are being led down a medical pathway that then there's no coming back from, or even if you try to come back, then it's all sorts of harm. So that's my fear. And I think that sorry, I'm going on a bit, I'm stopping in a minute, that ignorance and fear has been played on to push a particular agenda. And I think there's a lot of projection that's going on, in that people who are seeing children and projecting their own childhood confusion and unhappiness onto others. And I think it's really dangerous. And I'm just really glad that there's organisations like Safe Schools Alliance that are trying to do something about it. I think it's vital. I'll stop now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne.
Comments? Tracy?
No, I think it was very interesting what Anne said. Yes, it is a case of letting everyone grow up. Children need to be allowed to grow up and discover who and what they are, and they certainly shouldn't be allowed to make irreversible, harmful decisions like we've seen in the case of Kira Bell. We need to let children get to adulthood, and we need to support them to do that by making space for them to explore identity and not being very rigid in what girls do and what boys do and who should play with who. We need to give them space to grow up and be their own person.
I think there's just another point to add to that. And this is actually what we sort of look at in our guide to what happens if school socially transitions your child against your wishes, which we know happens. Is that so the sort of act of socially transitioning a child isn't a benign act in itself. You know, that is an act of doing that, and actually is a pathway, and therefore if the schools are making that decision or supporting those decisions, they're not equipped to make those decisions at all. You know, they're not health professionals, they're not psychologists, they may be teachers, but they're not equipped to do that. And so actually, I think pointing out to schools that, you know, you're not just being nice and kind, actually what you could be doing is actually more harmful, just like you were saying, Anne. You know, these children need the space to figure out who they are. And actually, you know, we know that if a child socially transitions, it's way harder to come back. I mean, I think there's a statistic in the Transgender Trend report that says that children experiencing gender dysphoria, if they are supported compassionately through that, 80% of them will go on to, you know, desist, to actually to come out the other side of it after they've experienced puberty and, you know, grown up a bit, and they will come out the other side of it and actually no longer think that they identify as the other sex. That's 80% of children. If schools are going through the socially transitioning phase, that is not benign. They are going along a treatment pathway that could actually stop those children those 80% of children who would actually come out the other side of it and say, like you said, Anne, oh, actually, you know, I've discovered I'm a lesbian, or I'm a gay man, and I possibly am autistic, and actually that was a terrible time, and now I know who I am. By socially transitioning, schools are not allowing, they're not actually being kind, they're being anything but. The easy thing for schools to do, though, is just follow, you know, the rhetoric of saying we should affirm everybody who says we need them to be their authentic selves, and actually getting across to them that could be doing more harm in the long run than good, I think is an important point.
I imagined that schools would use their RSE lessons to let people know that it's important to have boundaries before they start teaching them about consent. Because if you don't know that you're allowed to have boundaries that you decide you are comfortable with, how can you make informed consent to crossing them? That's not done.
Yeah.
No.
No, we totally agree. Yeah, there's RSE could be a really important part of safeguarding, and we're big believers in RSE, sort of properly inclusive RSE, which is sensitive to everyone's different families and beliefs, and acknowledges that not all the children will grow up to be straight, some of them will grow up to be gay, lesbian or bi. So we're really in favour of that, and it should be an important part of safeguarding. And like you say, it should be about sort of reinforcing boundaries and reassuring children that they have rights and boundaries, but also telling them that other people have rights and boundaries as well. But sadly, some resources we've seen seem to do exactly the opposite, and are actually, not only are they not telling children about how important it is for them to set their own boundaries, they're actively undermining the children's boundaries, like we saw with the CPS schools pack, which seemed to insinuate to girls that if they complained about a male in their toilets, that was them committing a hate crime. So there's some really major concerns with what's going on in RSE, because it could be such a force for good, and this is something that we really owe it to children to get right. It has to be for the benefit of children.
You mentioned Jess Taylor, who's done quite a bit of research, but what sort of research, apart from hers, is being done to identify the risks to vulnerable children of identifying as trans or non-binary?
I don't think there's much research being done at all. I mean, like we saw with James Campion at Bath University, people try and do research into detransitioners, because that's obviously a growing community that needs support and needs quite specialist reports. And he was blocked from doing research that he wanted to do that would really have benefited a lot of people. So I think, sadly, the answer there is that the research that needs to be done just isn't being done at the moment. I mean, we do have some research being done into sexism. Like I said, the NEU in UK Feminista did that research 4 years ago in 2017 and produced It's Just Everywhere. But we're 4 years down the line, that doesn't seem to have been embedded into school. And things, if anything, seem to have got worse since 2017, not better. So the answer is there needs to be more research done. And again, that's something people can be writing to their MPs and asking, where is this research? Why isn't it being done? I mean, we're looking into what we can do some research on ourselves, because the research just isn't there.
Yeah, there's a comment here that Lisa Littman, who's a really brave researcher, is doing some research on trans. So all help and support to her. She's not prepared to back down. I'm admiration for her.
I mean, obviously, she's took huge abuse for the research she did when she originally did the paper on ROGD. She was really heavily targeted, and it's so sad to see someone who cares so deeply about girls and getting the research so that they can be treated in the right manner, and all she's sort of got for doing that really important and needed research is a lot of abuse. I mean, you could see just recently, you've seen in the papers what's happened to Kath Stock for really a quite temperate middle ground book she's written, and she's been so heavily targeted at her university, and that serves not just to shut up Kath Stott, but to shut up anyone else who may be thinking about doing maybe controversial research that could help some really vulnerable people. I mean, it's good that Sussex has spoken out in support of her, but there has been a lot of silencing going on, and a lot of really needed research has been blocked. And there's certainly, I mean, if you look at Caroline, I can't say her surname, Criado Perez,
Yes.
The woman who writes about invisible women, she's done a lot of research into how research just doesn't take into account women and girls at all. And I think she got abused just for writing that book. So there's
I know
problem.
And I do know that where Lisa Littman published her research in PLOS, I do know that there was an awful lot of pressure that the publisher came under as well. So, that absolutely, pressures on academic freedoms from a publishing point of view, pressure on not publishing that article because, it didn't align with the rhetoric of the day, which is, our whole society is built on academic freedoms and having debates, and actually, the peer review process is there to make sure that solid research gets published, even if you disagree with the outcomes. So the fact that, publishers are also being targeted to silence, and to not publish these articles as well. I mean, it goes very, very far and very deep, I'm afraid.
It was really concerning to see that schools seem to want to use teaching materials which are inappropriate for their pupils' ages or indeed their level of maturity. Why do they prepare to take that risk?
I think, go on, Tanya.
I simply do know. People would need to be asking their individual schools that. I mean, sadly, if schools are choosing inappropriate resources, it really is down to parents to challenge on that. That shouldn't be the situation, but that does appear to be the current situation. I mean, a lot of teachers are choosing correct resources or are challenging it themselves. I mean, we hear from teachers just as often as we hear from parents these days. A lot of teachers are very concerned about what's being brought in and given to them to teach, and they don't want to teach it. But then we've got problems with unions endorsing things that they shouldn't, and a lot of teachers fear that their unions will not support them if they approach them for support. So we are back to just the widespread regulatory capture, which we do need to unpick, and that needs everybody to challenge their school and keep writing to their MP, because the MPs and the peers, they are the ones that can do something about this.
I see. Yeah. Tell us about equality and diversity red flags.
I think this was one of our first. I think this was our first published piece, wasn't it, Tanya?
Yes, that's one we did a long time ago. Yes.
So I think
sort of an easy checklist.
Sorry, Tanya.
No, it was an easy checklist we did for parents and teachers, so that they could very easily check their resources, check policies, see if it had any of these problems in it. Like the big one is, are they referring to gender as the protected characteristic instead of sex? That's your first really big red flag.
Citing lobby groups as sources of expertise. I've just got it open. Not talking about equality impact assessment. So, on any policy that put in place, looking at how it impacts everybody in that organisation. I mean, the concept of adopting a policy which says trans boys can use the girls or trans girls can use the girls' changing rooms without having an assessment. I mean, really, you shouldn't need an assessment on how that's going to impact the girls in your school, but the fact that you haven't kind of carried that out. I mean, we had one, and I don't know whether we published it anywhere, and we probably should revisit it, Tanya, but we had a children's right impact assessment done on the Oxford Trans Toolkit as part of that legal challenge. And it, it failed on so many counts, overriding, the UN, human rights of children. Another one is advocating confidentiality for trans identified children, I think, because the argument is that, well, we wouldn't necessarily tell a parent that their child was gay. We wouldn't tell a parent that their child was trans. Being trans isn't a safeguarding risk. However, on the other hand, their arguments for supporting them in the way they do is to say, 1 in 4 will attempt suicide. Well, we would say then that is a massive safeguarding red flag. If you're believing that piece of research, then absolutely you can't advocate confidentiality, because there's your safeguarding red flag right there. So there's a lot about that. I mean, promoting mixed sex or so-called gender neutral toilets. Any of these in your school are red flags, because the likelihood is if there's one of them, there will be the others. So yeah, it is. That there you go, using emotive suicide statistics to put pressure on schools, suggesting non-conformity of gender indicates a child is trans. The Oxfordshire Toolkit said that preschool teachers should watch for signs of gender non-conformity in pre-verbal children, which was horrifying. Actually saying to teachers, you should look out for gender non-conforming behavior in 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds. So anything that has a policy that kind of does this, and yeah, making inaccurate assertions regarding biology. And I think just generally using lobby groups, I mean, to do any sort of training or provide resources within the schools. I mean, the problem is that, in all honesty, we haven't come across an organisation yet that provides training for schools in relationship and sex education that we would recommend.
I
don't think, Tanya, have we?
No,
anyone yet?
We're hoping there'll be some out soon. We like Gail Dines, and Culture Reframed is worth having a look at. She's very good on porn in schools. There are some resources that accompany UK feministas. It's just everywhere. There's Men at Work with Michael Conray. He does stuff just for boys. He's very good. There needs to be something similar for girls out there. So there are the odd few bits, but definitely, like Tracy said, there's no one inclusive scheme that we can recommend. And considering the amount of public money that has been given to these little political lobby groups to produce resources that undermine safeguarding, it's really shocking that all this public money has been wasted and there's no benefit to children. In actual fact, there's a detriment to children. So that's something that needs looking at.
Has Transgender Trend produced any materials?
They have. Go on, Tanya.
They've got some booklets for schools, like how to treat trans children. They've got a booklet on. They've produced a booklet on all the safeguarding concerns with Stonewall. Helen Saxby wrote a children's right impact assessment on the All Sorts toolkit. That's all on their website.
And I think there is a guide to RSE. I think there is. And there is a guide to RSE, isn't there? I think, but it's not actually it's not like a scheme of work or resources. But I mean, it shouldn't be difficult, should it? Really,
Something that's
no. I mean, they've got My Body Is Me, and there's worksheets to go with that, and that's really nice for early years. And again, Jess Taylor at Victim Focus, she's got some stuff for sort of children who have been abused or working through trauma. She does have a few bits and pieces as well. So there are a few things out there, but there's nothing comprehensive and inclusive, which really now it's compulsory in school. There needs to be something that teachers, and schools can look at and say, no, we know 100% that meets the statutory requirements, and we also know that it adheres to all safeguarding and won't leave us at risk of legal challenges, because this is the problem with a lot of what's out at the moment. Schools are risking legal action by using it.
So we could do with a crowdfunder that could fund a body to prepare the materials which do go, which are consistent with the Equality Act and protected characteristics, and is, you know, compassionate towards all the children who have adverse childhood experiences.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we've talked about, absolutely, doing. Yes, it's something we've talked about.
Okay, well, that's something to work on, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice if we had something that we could just say, because people often ask us, have we got recommendations for alternatives? So yeah, it would be good. We do know of some people that are working on things. So, you know, we would hope that comes to fruition. The problem is that, you know, it's teachers who really need to be writing these. And as we know, teachers are overwhelmed and busy people. But yeah, you're right. I mean, if we could pay somebody, if we could pay a teacher to spend their summer holidays or Easter holidays writing, then, you know, that might be a way forward.
That's a campaign that deserves to be undertaken then, isn't it? I've got a question now from Gillian Moran. It's a question about pronouns. Gillian,
yeah, I have been typing along as we've been talking,
right,
answering some questions, but I think it's worth talking pronouns, because it's.
Gillian, are you ready to make your point?
Hi all. I was just wondering if the issue I had is my daughter's friend has decided to call herself they them, and she's thinking about changing her name, and I don't think it's compelled as such. I don't think there's a consequence for children for not using the pronouns, but they are using the pronouns. And I was just wondering, is it a bit too much of a reach for me to go in and say that I'm concerned about that? I don't want to be unkind to the little lassie either, but I just don't think this is good for her, and I don't know that her parents even know about it.
No, I think it does. Do you know who the safeguarding officer is at your children's school? Do they have on the website how to raise safeguarding concerns?
No,
I mean, really,
they don't.
They should have a way for parents to raise safeguarding concerns. My children's school has a dedicated email where you can email in concerns, but I definitely think that's worth raising from the point of view that you're concerned about that child's welfare, you're concerned about where this has come from, and you're concerned about possibly where has she got this from, what has she been looking at online, what other issues is this masking. I think the school won't ever be able to get back to you and tell you what they've done, because that'd be breaching that child's confidentiality, but it's certainly always worth raising any concerns you have about a child with the school, because that may be the one missing piece of the jigsaw that then ties up with what the school knows or what someone else has already told them. So yes, it's certainly worth raising from the point of view that you are concerned for that child's welfare.
Yeah, what I found too is it does make me wonder, because if they'll change pronouns, what else will they change? So if they have a little boy in the school who decides he's also changed, will that mean that they're going to change? You know, I'd like to know how far they take that. Is it a thing where it's just to do with politeness, or is it a thing where it's more? And it hasn't come up before.
I think it's definitely worth asking those questions. It's probably worth you having a quick look through in order to sort of help you maybe ask some of those questions, because I think it's a good point. It's like, well, you know, it's a conversation we were having at dinner tonight, actually. You know, it's pronouns are one thing, but then what happens if, as you say, then we're all being nice by calling that little boy she, and then all of a sudden that little boy is, you know, in the girls' changing rooms and in the sports. And so, you know, what starts off as a kindness actually, you know, has consequences, and where does it lead? So I think it's a really good point. The fact sheet we have on advice note for socially transitioning, schools who socially transition, I mean, I'm not saying that's what's happening in your school, but if you have a little look through that, it might help you frame some questions and concerns you might have, because I think it's a good point. It's like, you know, well, how far are you going with this? It's definitely worth flagging.
Yeah, no, thank you. I was having a look at that at your website during this, and there's a lot of good stuff there, so I will do that. I just felt, am I overreaching? You know, sometimes it's like, it's not my child. That kind of concern.
You might tell the parents.
Yes, I think so. I don't know them very well. That's my other problem.
Thanks for your question, Gillian. That's great.
Thank you.
We've got another question from Liberal Voice for Women. Does the DFE collect data on the number of trans children in schools, if there's one in every classroom?
No, and it's actually worse than that, because so they don't collect data on that. And the school census, and this is something that we're looking at, allows schools to self-identify the gender of the amount of the children that they have in their schools. So that's the guidance. I think the guidance is based on some very old-fashioned wording, you know, in the days where gender was actually synonymous with sex and people used it interchangeably. However, this has been used, I think, within schools. So I think if you look on the school census, which is a really important data collection device, if you look on the school census, it will say, you know, how many boys and girls, and this can be self-identified. So not only do you not know how many trans students there are, trans-identified children there are in schools, because it doesn't collect the data, you don't actually know how many boys and girls there are in schools either. And so, you know, it goes back to the same question about the census. You know, you have to be asking the question about sex. And if you want to ask an additional question, I think it would be really useful about how many children in your school are identifying, are trans identified. I think it would be useful data to collect on that, actually, but they don't even collect on the sex of the children. So yeah, so that that data collection point is a big issue, and it is something that we're looking at. So yes, so yeah, no, so yeah, the answer is no, but even worse.
There's a question from WT. Since the law, the GRA, only allows gender reassignment for adults, why are schools allowing children to change gender when they legally can't? Great question, WT.
Because they've been advised by lobby groups such as All Sorts and Stonewall, and All Sorts and Stonewall have then advised other organisations such as the PSHE Association and the NSPCC, and now everybody is misrepresenting the law to schools, and we've ended up in a position where we've got so-called Stonewall law, because schools have been told what Stonewall would like the law to be, not what the law actually is, and it's a very concerning situation.
Crikey. Do you know, it strikes me that the most effective thing we could do together is actually take out a case, if it's possible, against Stonewall and their cohorts and their myrmidons for transgressing the safeguarding laws. Is there an offence of breaching the safeguarding rules?
Well, there's a lot of, at the moment, the big case against Stonewall is Alison Bailey is taking a legal case against Stonewall, and obviously a lot of people such as Ofcom, various councils, people are starting to withdraw from the diversity champion scheme. So certainly people are waking up to the fact Stonewall's misrepresenting the law, but then we're stuck with, well, who told Stonewall to do this? Because I don't think Stonewall were the ones who originally came up with this. I mean, pre about 2015, I was actively pushing for Stonewall to go into schools. They were doing really good work on challenging homophobic bullying. And then around 2015, they started to go a bit wrong. And I was finding myself sending emails to the school that really didn't make sense, saying, look, you've got homophobic bullying in here that needs challenging, but please don't let Stonewall in the school because they'll make the situation worse. But if we go back further, all sorts, trans inclusion guidance came out, I think 2013, the original one, and that was based on the Cornwall guidance, which came out in 2012. So really, although it's Stonewall going around misrepresenting the law at the moment, we do need to unpick back further from Stonewall and find out what happened, why in 2015 did they start misrepresenting the law. I mean, they're perfectly entitled to lobby for whatever changes in the law they want. What they're not entitled to do is do that by stealth, by getting into all various organisations, including schools, and telling people that the law is already what they would like it to be, because it is not. And this is then when we end up with these horrible situations with girls having to put up with a boy in their changing room, and it's just frightening. I mean, we tried to take the judicial review of CPS being a membership of the Stonewall Diversity Champion, because obviously it was a schoolgirl took that case, and the original thing we wanted the CPS hate crimes pack withdrawn from schools, and it went away for review, but they wouldn't withdraw it. And only when we got to court did they then confirm that actually they were permanently withdrawing the schools pack. So from that point of view, it was a win that the schools pack has gone away. However, because that schools pack had now been withdrawn, the schoolgirl challenging it had lost standing as a claimant. So we weren't able to challenge the decision that the judicial review wasn't granted on the relationship between CPS and Stonewall, and that had led to a lack of impartiality. So eventually, yes, there will be a claimant who has been discriminated against by someone who has listened to guidance from Stonewall, and hopefully eventually that will end up in court, and there will be a judicial review about if being a member of Stonewall's Diversity Champion scheme goes much further than it should do, because it seems to have morphed from being about supporting your lesbian and gay employees and making sure they're not discriminated against, into indoctrinating companies into a particular view of the law and then getting them to perpetuate that for you. So yes, hopefully at some point there will be another legal case, but at the moment Alison Bailey's is certainly the legal case to watch with regards to Stonewall.
I mean, I think there is work to be done with the Department for Education, you know, in some form or another, because ultimately they just need to be doing their jobs. They're not, because, you know, if they had a better handle on all of this, but of course, you know, Department, as we pointed out, and somebody on the chat's pointed out, Department for Education, you know, embedded with Stonewall, they still, despite us asking repeatedly, they still have a link to Stonewall resources on their PSHE RSE pages, even though their guidance themselves say schools shouldn't work with single interest lobby groups. And so, you know, they're actually breaking their own guidance on pretty much the same page. So, you know, there's definitely work to be done with trying to get the Department for Education to take some responsibility and do its job. I mean, I don't know, perhaps somebody wants to take the Department for Education to court.
Just a note from Evelyn, she's had a look on Transgender Trends website, and they do actually have stuff on RSE. So I'm going to look at that later. Thank you, Evelyn. You talk about the problem of minor attracted persons on your website. Is that a real factor in schools, do you think?
Whereabouts is that mentioned on the website? Is that in relation to the genderbread man?
I think it might be. I can't remember now, but when I was having a quick look this afternoon, I thought that you had seen this and it was mentioned on your website about the problem of delegating your responsibility, really, to people who may not have the interest of the children in mind.
I don't recall us. Alison, I can't recall that on the website.
No matter. My
I'm sorry.
question, in that case, I'll see if I can find it and come back to it. But
Yeah, please
how
do.
scary was it when you took out the JRs that you did?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, the kudos has to go to the girls who did this. I mean, they were amazing. You know, they saw injustice, they were fearful for their rights, the sex-based rights, and, you know, they made the decision that they wanted to do something. So, I mean, I think we were just really happy to support them in whatever way we could, by, you know, taking a lot of the pressure off. I mean, obviously they're anonymous and nobody knows who they are. In fact, you know, there's so few people who know who they are. Not everybody in Safe Schools Alliance knows who each of the claimants are in each of those cases. So, you know, we were very careful about protecting them and their families. I think, yeah, of course, it's a scary thing to take legal action, especially, you know, against the people that you're taking it against. But I think we knew we were right, and we knew we had a case. I mean, we knew the law was on our side. So yes, I mean, of course, you know, and it's a lot of work, and especially is the fact that, you know, we took the role of being the sort of voice, because obviously the girls and their families couldn't be the voice. So there's a lot of work involved, you know, for us to sort of raise that awareness, and you know, obviously the responsibility for crowdfunding, which was falling to us, because it's not a given that these cases get legal aid. Absolutely not. I mean, sometimes they will get legal aid, but if something is in the wider public interest, the Legal Aid Board will expect there to be crowdfunding. So the responsibility of that is you know, is quite pressured. But no, we were just really pleased, and we would be happy to support anyone who wants to take legal action, you know, either in the background or by helping them front it, or by helping, you know, liaise with people. Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately we think it needs to happen. And unfortunately, we wish it didn't, but, you know, it does.
And in the olden days, you used to see the government or the Attorney General would take on actions that were in the public interest. But no, now it's us crowdfunding our own case.
Yeah.
Something seems to be going wrong there, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
I just found the reference. Actually, on your website, I just did a search, and it's going back to 2019, 14th of September. It's an article to do with Morning Star, Easy as PIE, the rebranding of paedophilia. So it talks there about minor attracted persons. And some of the people who are MAPs use the genderbread person as their profile picture.
Yes, I remember that. Yes, that is one of the concerns. We have noticed that the genderbread person, man, whatever it is, a lot of accounts which have the MAP symbol in their bio on Twitter, which is minor attracted person, and then they quite often list the age they're attracted to alongside it, say 5 to 8. So this is sort of particularly grim. We noticed some of those accounts were in fact using the genderbread man as their avatar on Twitter. So there are serious concerns about links there, and to what extent some very unpleasant people are using gender ideology to unpick safeguarding, particularly around children. There are a lot of questions that need to be answered, and schools do need to be aware and aware of what people's motivations may be. Just because someone tells you they're motivated by helping children, it doesn't mean that they are. If their actions are actually reducing safeguarding around children, then that needs to be questioned. And all this stuff coming into schools about excluding parents from being involved with their children, and the amount of schools we've had, like the case in Wales recently, where a school was socially transitioning a 13-year-old boy, I think he was also ASD, without his parents' knowledge. That's quite a severe unpicking of safeguarding, because it's always in a child's best interest when all the adults in their lives are working together to help them. So if you're trying to exclude adults from children's lives who may well be a protective factor, like that child's parents, that's a really quite serious concern. And like that article in the Morning Star says, this is something we've seen before in the 70s and 80s, when PI infiltrated the children's rights movement, which should be something that everyone's in favour of. Everyone, of course, wants children to have rights, but PI managed to infiltrate that and then started talking about really quite unpleasant things like children's right to consent to sex. And that's not something that any normal person thinks about when you think about what rights children should have and how you can keep children safe.
I see. Look, we've just got one last question, but I know you have to leave shortly.
I do have to go at 8:30, I'm afraid. That's why I just turned my video. I've had incoming. So I do have to go at 8:30. So, I mean, I don't know whether Tanya or whether we'd sort of reached the end of your questions. But yes, I do have to make a move.
I think there was just one last comment which you saw and responded to about
yeah, I mean, yes, unfortunately, some schools are changing markers, and some schools are doing it without parents' knowledge or consent as well. Well, I think, I mean, we clearly see the worst of it. Okay, so by the time things are ending up in our inbox, we are, you know, at the kind of rough edge of it, and I'm sure, you know, we don't generally hear about the schools who are doing a good job and doing it well. We are hearing from the people, you know, that the worrying side of this. But the amount that we are hearing is you know, worrying indeed, from our point of view. And we do feed all of this back to the Department for Education, and you know, we have a route through to MPs and the House of Lords as well. So Tanya did a, you know, we've both sort of done talks to sort of prominent MPs and House in the House of Lords as well. So we are representing all of this. We just need to keep plugging on. But what we really need from, you know, parents and teachers is to also keep plugging on, and, you know, to have to attack this, you know, at the top, but also from, you know, from underneath as well.
Yeah, I think I'd like to see a sort of a star system for schools that do actually stay within the safeguarding rules. But I'd like to thank all the members here tonight for your questions. And thanks to all of you for joining us and joining in the conversation. And I'd like to thank you, Tracy and Tanya, for your accounts of the development and work of the Safe Schools Alliance. And members of the audience may know your website is safeschoolsallianceuk.net, and your Twitter account is @safeschools_UK. Now, our next talk is on Monday, the 11th of November, when I'll be talking to Dr. Helen Joyce, author of the best-selling book, Trans. Do look out for the announcement, or better still, sign up to our website and we'll send you the invitation as soon as it comes out. We'll also want to hear from you with any woman-related issues or children-related problems that you may want us to raise. Thanks to Anna, our technical staff and organisers. Thanks to all of you for being part of a fascinating evening. And most of all, to our speakers, Tanya Carter and Tracy Shaw of Safe Schools Alliance, for a most thought-provoking evening. And a reminder that if you've enjoyed their account, you can help to support their work on their website at safeschoolsallianceuk.net/donate. We're going to stay on Zoom, I think, for a little while longer, but thank you so much for joining us, and it's been a real treat to talk to you. Cheers, girls.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thanks very much for having us. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Tanya.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. And if anybody's staying behind, Kath, that's really interesting to know about your volunteer who's a school data officer and is refusing to change markers. That's interesting. Is she getting any flack from that?
No, I don't think so, not at the moment. She's got really good reasons for not doing it. I think her name is Jo Molt.
Oh, no names, no pack drill.
I can ask her. I can ask her about it.
No, that's great. I mean, I don't know whether that's brave or the standard behaviour that you would expect from a data officer, but it's really reassuring to hear about.
I think it's unusual.
Is it? Is it? Okay. Well, all power to her elbow, and I really do think we ought to see a glittering gold guide to schools that are doing it right, because they don't get enough praise. They get so much criticism, and if there are schools who are doing it well, by cracky, they need to be recognised. But I don't know whether that would attract more flack their way. So it might be a double-edged sword. I don't know. Now, there's still a bunch of people online here. And I don't know if you want to stay and open up yourselves. I'll take it off speaker view and put it on gallery view. There's lots of people here. And if you would like to join in and have a chat, some of you have got to go, but there are quite a few who are more than happy, I think, to stay a little bit longer and have a general discussion. So welcome to you all. I've got quite a few people who aren't on screen. So if you're so kind, can I ask you to turn on your video, because that gives a bit of security for the rest of us that you are.
Stop the recording. Would that be all right? Just, and then I can tell.
Oh yes, please. Yes, please. I thought we had. Thank you. Thanks, Kath, and for making that point. See you next week.
Alison,